Donald Trump said China pays the tariffs 47 times since April 2025. 47 times. Jasmine Crockett counted, because that is what lawyers do. They count. And tonight, in a town hall in Phoenix, Arizona, before 50 million viewers watching live, she brought something Donald Trump hated more than anything else in the world: evidence. Not the complicated kind that requires expert witnesses and 3-hour depositions. The simple kind: a Walmart shopping cart, a receipt, and a question that any housewife in America could answer, but the President of the United States could not. If China pays the tariffs, Crockett asked, her voice cutting through the nervous silence of the auditorium, then why did this shopping cart cost me $135 more than it did last year? A simple question, third-grade math. But for the men sitting 10 feet away from her in a suit that cost more than most Americans' monthly rent, it was more complicated than any lawsuit he had ever faced. Because this time, there were no lawyers to answer for him, no Truth Social to scream witch hunt, just cameras and an audience and a black woman from Dallas holding a Walmart receipt. The moderator tried to establish ground rules. Crockett smiled politely and waited. Trump fidgeted with his microphone. The audience, a carefully selected mix of Republicans, Democrats, and independents, sat in uncomfortable silence. Everyone knew something was about to happen. Nobody knew exactly what. If you have ever looked at a grocery bill and wondered why everything is so expensive now, stay with this story. Tonight, you will get a name and an address for the person responsible. And if you know someone who is also paying more for less, share this with them. They deserve to know who is signing their receipts. The town hall in Phoenix was not chosen by accident. Arizona, a swing state, a place where the summer heat was only matched by the rising cost of living. A state where retirees on fixed incomes watched their grocery bills climb every month, while the president told them someone else was paying for it. A state that had flipped blue in 2020, red in 2024, and now sat on a knife's edge, wondering which way to fall next. The venue held 800 people. Every seat was filled. Outside, another 2,000 watched on screens set up in the parking lot. The desert night still warm enough to make standing bearable. Across the country, living rooms and bars and break rooms tuned in, drawn by the promise of something different, not a debate with rigid time limits, not a rally with scripted applause, a conversation, or something close to it. Jasmine Crockett walked onto the stage carrying a canvas shopping bag. Not a prop, real groceries. She set them on the table between herself and Trump, then pulled out items one by one, placing them like evidence in a courtroom. A box of cereal, a package of chicken, diapers, a coffee maker, children's shoes, a bottle of laundry detergent, a pack of batteries, a simple blue dress, the kind a mother might buy for her daughter's school picture day. $847, she said, holding up a receipt that unfurled like a scroll. That is what I paid at Walmart this morning for these items. Last year, the same items, same brands, same store, $712. She let the receipt drop onto the table where it coiled like a snake. $135 difference. That is not inflation, Mr. President. Inflation was coming down before you took office. The Federal Reserve had it under control. We were heading toward the 2% target that economists consider healthy. Then you came in with your tariffs, and everything changed. This is not natural economic movement. This is policy. Your policy. Trump shifted in his seat, his face already reddening. China is paying billions into our treasury. No, sir, Crockett cut him off, her voice sharp but controlled. No, they are not. And I have the receipts to prove it, literally. She picked up the cereal box, turning it so the audience and cameras could see the familiar logo. This cereal has wheat from Canada, 25% tariff. The cardboard box is made with materials from China, tariff. The ink on the label, the plastic in the bag inside, the glue holding it all together, tariffs. By the time this box reaches a shelf in Phoenix, it has been taxed 4 different times by 4 different tariff schedules. And who pays those taxes? Not Canada, not China, not the cereal company, because they pass their costs to retailers. Not the retailers, because they pass their costs to customers. Mrs. Rodriguez in row 3, who is trying to feed her grandchildren on Social Security. That is who pays. The camera found Mrs. Rodriguez, 73 years old. Silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, hands folded in her lap, nodding slowly, her eyes glistening. You have said China pays the tariffs 47 times since April, Crockett continued. I counted. My staff counted. We have a spreadsheet, 47 times on Truth Social, in speeches, in interviews. But the Federal Reserve Chair, Jerome Powell, a man appointed by Republicans, a man you yourself reappointed, said something different last month. He said, and I quote, "Tariffs are causing most of the inflation overshoot we are currently experiencing." She paused, letting the words hang in the air like smoke. Not China, not Mexico, not the European Union, not currency manipulation or unfair trade practices or any of the other villains you like to blame. American families are paying your tariffs, Mr. President. $1,200 per household per year, according to the Tax Foundation. That is not a liberal think tank. That is a nonpartisan organization that has been analyzing tax policy since 1937. $1,200 per household per year. She picked up the children's shoes, small and pink with Velcro straps. That is not America first. That is American families pay first. Trump leaned forward, his voice rising. The tariffs are bringing back manufacturing. We are seeing factories. Where? Crockett interrupted. Show me. Show me one factory that opened because of your tariffs. One. Give me a name, a location, a number of jobs, because I can show you plenty that closed. I can show you farmers in Iowa who lost their soybean markets because China retaliated and bought from Brazil instead. I can show you auto workers in Michigan whose plants are cutting shifts because steel costs 40% more than it did 2 years ago. I can show you small business owners in Texas, in my district, who cannot afford to stock their shelves because everything they import costs more. She held up the shoes again. These shoes are made in Vietnam. Before your tariffs, they cost $22. Now they cost $31. That is a 40% increase for children's shoes, size 6, for a little girl who is going to outgrow them in 4 months. And you know what happens when children's shoes cost 40% more? Parents buy fewer of them. Kids wear shoes that are too small. Kids go to school with blisters on their feet. Kids get made fun of for wearing worn-out shoes because their parents cannot afford new ones. Her voice softened, but her eyes stayed locked on Trump. That is not an economic policy, Mr. President. That is a choice. You chose to tax the shoes on children's feet so you could stand at rallies and say you are being tough on China. But China is not the one whose feet hurt. American children are, and their parents are the ones lying awake at night trying to figure out how to make the budget work. The audience was silent. Not the uncomfortable silence of embarrassment, the heavy silence of recognition, of people seeing their own receipts, their own struggles, their own sleepless nights reflected back at them from that stage. Trump opened his mouth to respond, but Crockett was not finished. You want to know the real joke? The tariff revenue you are so proud of, those billions pouring into the Treasury, they do not even cover the cost of the tax cuts you gave to corporations in 2017. You raised taxes on working families, hidden in the price of everything they buy, to pay for tax cuts for billionaires and multinational corporations. That is not art of the deal. That is art of the steal. And tonight, 50 million Americans are watching you. Try to explain why they should thank you for picking their pockets. She turned to the audience, her voice carrying to every corner of the room. If you are paying more for groceries, more for clothes, more for diapers and medicine and school supplies, and you want to know why, the answer is sitting right there, 10 feet away from me. And he has been lying to you about it 47 times. The applause started slowly from the back of the room, then built like a wave rolling toward the stage, not the orchestrated cheering of a political rally where staffers cue the crowd and signs wave on command, the genuine, angry, relieved applause of people who finally had someone saying out loud what they had been feeling for months. Trump sat in his chair, jaw tight, fingers gripping the armrests until his knuckles went white. Round 1 was over, and the receipt was on the table. If you are feeling this in your own wallet, share this story. Let others know they are not alone. And stay tuned, because we are just getting started. If you thought the tariff lie was bad, wait until you hear about the wall. Crockett let the applause fade naturally, not rushing, not milking it. She reached into her bag again. This time she pulled out a photograph, blown up, poster-sized, mounted on foam board. A picture of the border wall, half-constructed, rusting in the Arizona desert. Metal bollards standing like broken teeth against the scrubland. Gaps where construction had stopped. Tumbleweeds gathering at the base. Let us talk about another promise, she said. Because China pays the tariffs is not your first lie about other people paying for things. It is not even your most famous one. She held up the photograph, turning slowly so everyone in the room could see it. 2016, you stood on stages across this country and made one promise more than any other. It was your signature line, your calling card, the thing that got crowds on their feet every single time. Mexico will pay for the wall. You said it at every rally. You put it on hats. You put it on t-shirts. You made crowds chant it until they were hoarse. Who's going to pay for the wall? And they would scream back, Mexico. She set the photograph down, leaning it against the table so it faced the audience. So, let me ask you, Mr. President, how much has Mexico paid for this wall? Trump's face shifted through several expressions in quick succession: defiance, calculation, something that might have been embarrassment if he were capable of it. We have negotiated trade deals that. More than zero, Crockett said flatly. Zero. Not a peso, not a cent, not a single centavo. Mexico has paid exactly nothing for your wall. Their government has said so. Our government has said so. The Congressional Budget Office has said so. Everyone who can count has said so. She walked closer to the photograph, pointing at the rusting metal. Do you know who has paid? The American taxpayer. Do you know how much? $46.6 billion in your 2022 spending bill alone. That is not counting what was spent in your first term. That is not counting the military funds you diverted. That is just one bill, 1 year, $46.6 billion. Money taken from Medicaid, from SNAP benefits, from programs that feed hungry children and provide health care to the elderly, so you could build a wall that Mexico was supposed to pay for. She walked closer to Trump, her heels clicking on the stage floor with each step. You have a pattern, Mr. President. A very specific, very predictable pattern. You promise that someone else will pay. China will pay the tariffs. Mexico will pay for the wall. You will be rich if you sign up for Trump University. And then, when the bill comes due, when the check needs to be written, when someone actually has to reach into their pocket and pull out real money, who pays? Not China, not Mexico, not you. American families every single time. Trump tried to interrupt, his voice rising. The wall is securing our border. We have the lowest illegal crossings in. The wall is rusting in the desert, Crockett shot back. Miles of it unfinished. Contractors walking off the job because funding keeps getting tied up in courts. Because it turns out that building a 2,000-mile wall through mountains and rivers and private property and tribal lands is more complicated than a campaign slogan. But you got what you wanted, right? You got the rallies. You got the chants. You got the red hats. You got elected twice. And Americans got the bill, $46.6 billion and counting. She turned back to the audience, her voice dropping to a conversational tone. This is not about immigration policy. We can have honest debates about border security. Reasonable people can disagree about the best approach. This is about a con. A very simple con that has worked for this man his entire life. Promise that someone else will pay. Collect the benefits for yourself. Take the credit. Take the applause. Take the votes. And leave the people who believed you holding the bill. She held up 2 fingers. 2 promises. China pays. Mexico pays. Both lies. Both exposed. Both paid for by you, the American people, out of your taxes and your grocery bills and your children's futures. And I am just getting started. She paused, her eyes scanning the audience, then returning to Trump. Because these are not the only people Donald Trump has promised would pay while picking your pockets. Have you ever heard of Trump University? If you have not, do not worry. You are about to. And unlike your tariffs and your wall, this one is not just a bad policy. This one is fraud. Certified, court-documented, $25 million settlement-paying fraud. The color drained from Trump's face. His hand moved toward his water glass, then stopped. Round 2 was over, and the pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. In 2005, Donald Trump had an idea, not a business idea, exactly, not a real estate idea, a marketing idea dressed up as education, wearing a graduation cap and charging tuition. He called it Trump University. The pitch was simple, delivered with all the confidence of a man who had spent decades convincing people he was smarter than he was. Pay up to $35,000, and Donald Trump would personally share his secrets of success. You would learn from hand-picked instructors, real estate experts chosen by Trump himself. You would learn techniques that Trump uses to build his empire. You would become rich. You would become successful. You would become, in some small way, like Donald Trump. 6,000 people believed him. 6,000 people who wanted a better life, who thought education was the path to prosperity, who trusted a famous name. They were wrong. Crockett pulled out a manila folder, thick with documents, and opened it slowly, deliberately. "Let me introduce you to some of the people who believed in Trump University," she said. Bob Gua, 76 years old, retired after 40 years of working in New York, used $35,000 of his retirement savings to enroll in the Gold Elite program, the premium package, the one that promised personal mentorship and insider secrets. She pulled a document from the folder. Do you know what Mr. Gua learned? Things he could have found on Google for free. Basic real estate information available in any library. Do you know how Trump's hand-picked instructors were actually selected? Trump admitted under oath in a deposition that he did not pick them, did not interview them, did not review their credentials, did not even know their names. Handpicked by Donald Trump meant handpicked by someone Trump never met. She held up the document. This is from Mr. Gua's testimony. Let me read it to you. The more and more I got involved in Trump University, the more and more I found out that I had truly been scammed. At first, it was embarrassing. I felt foolish. I felt like I should have known better. Then I became very, very angry that the men that scammed me out of all that money had the audacity to run for president. She set the document down and pulled out another. And here is someone else. I will call her Mrs. Williams because she asked for privacy, though her story is in the court records. A widow from Florida, 68 years old. Her husband died after 42 years of marriage, leaving her alone for the first time in her adult life. He had a life insurance policy, $200,000. Her security, her future, her husband's final gift to make sure she would be okay. Crockett's voice softened. Mrs. Williams wanted to invest that money wisely. She saw an advertisement for Trump University, a free seminar. She went, and they told her about the Gold Elite program, $35,000. They told her Donald Trump himself would share his secrets. They told her she could double, triple, quadruple her money in real estate. They told her this was her chance to secure a future. She looked at Trump. Do you know what Mrs. Williams got for her $35,000? A photo with a cardboard cutout of Donald Trump. Not even the real man. A cardboard cutout and a binder full of information she could have downloaded from the internet. She lost more than money. She lost her confidence. She lost her sense of judgment. She spent years wondering if she was stupid, if she deserved to be scammed, if her husband would be ashamed of her. Crockett set down the document. You promised these people they would be rich. You know who got rich? You. From their retirement savings, from their life insurance, from their dreams and their trust and their hope for a better future. Trump finally spoke, his voice defensive. Trump University had a 98% satisfaction rate. 98%. Those are real surveys. Then why did you pay $25 million to settle the lawsuit? Crockett fired back. $25 million, Mr. President, for something with a 98% satisfaction rate. Satisfied customers do not sue. Satisfied customers do not form class action lawsuits with 6,000 plaintiffs. Satisfied customers do not hire lawyers and spend years in court trying to get their money back. She pulled out one more document. The New York Attorney General called it, and I quote, a stunning reversal by Donald Trump and a major victory for the over 6,000 victims of his fraudulent university. Victims, that is the word, not students, not customers, victims. She emphasized the word again, letting it hang in the air. You know what you said before that settlement? You said, I will never settle this case. Never. I do not settle. Settling is for people who are guilty. Your exact words. And then you wrote a $25 million check. You know who does that? Guilty people. People who know that if they go to trial, if a jury sees the evidence, it will be worse. People who are, in the legal terminology we use in courtrooms, caught. Crockett walked back to her table and picked up the cereal box again. So let us connect the dots. China will pay. You pay. Mexico will pay. You pay. You will be rich from Trump University. You lost your savings. See the pattern. He promises someone else will pay or someone else will benefit. And every single time, regular Americans end up holding the bill while he walks away counting his money. She set the cereal box down. But Trump University victims at least got a settlement. They got some of their money back, 80 to 90 cents on the dollar, according to the court. It took years. It took lawyers. It took a lawsuit that dragged on through an entire presidential campaign, but they got something. The people paying your tariffs right now, they do not get a settlement. They do not get a class action lawsuit. They do not get a judge saying they were defrauded. They just get higher prices at Walmart and a president who tells them China is paying for it. The audience was no longer just nodding. Some were visibly angry, arms crossed, jaws set. Others had tears in their eyes, remembering their own moments of misplaced trust. An older man in the third row, wearing a veteran's cap with pins from Vietnam and Desert Storm, shook his head slowly, steadily, as if keeping time with a song only he could hear. 6,000 people trusted you with their life savings, Crockett said quietly. And you took it. That is not business. That is not negotiation. That is not the art of the deal. That is theft with a marketing budget and a famous name. She paused, looking directly at Trump. But wait, it gets worse. Because those 6,000 people are not the only ones you have cheated. They are not even close. Round 3 was over, and the receipts were piling up like evidence in a prosecutor's office. Before Donald Trump was president, before he was a reality TV star on The Apprentice, before Trump University scammed retirees out of their savings, he was a builder. Or more accurately, he hired builders, thousands of them, over decades, contractors, electricians, plumbers, carpenters, cabinet makers, painters, landscapers, small business owners who believed that a contract with Donald Trump meant a paycheck, who thought his name on an agreement was as good as money in the bank. They were wrong. Crockett pulled out a thick stack of papers, at least 3 inches high, and dropped them on the table with a thud that echoed through the silent auditorium. 3,500 lawsuits, she said. That is how many times Donald Trump or his companies have been sued by people he refused to pay. Not 300, not 35, 3,500. Exposed by USA Today in an investigation in 2016. Exposed again by dozens of news organizations since then. 3,500 contractors, vendors, and small business owners who did work for Donald Trump and never saw their money. She picked up the top document, a court filing yellowed with age. Edward Friel, family business in Philadelphia. Cabinet makers. 3 generations of craftsmen, father to son to grandson, building beautiful furniture with their hands. The Friels built the cabinets for Trump's Taj Mahal casino in Atlantic City. Beautiful work, museum quality, hand-fitted joints, custom finishes, the kind of craftsmanship that takes decades to learn and centuries of tradition to perfect. She looked up from the document. They were promised $83,000. Do you know how much they got? 0. Nothing. Trump refused to pay. Said the work was not up to standard. The same work that was already installed in his casino. The same work that guests were already admiring. Crockett looked at Trump. Do you remember what you said when the Friels complained, when they begged for their money? When they explained that $83,000 was their operating budget for months? You said 2 words, sue me. Those were your exact words. Sue me, because you knew something they did not. Suing a billionaire costs more than $83,000. Lawyers charge by the hour. Depositions take days. Discovery takes months. Appeals take years. Most small business owners cannot afford lawyers for that kind of fight. So they had a choice, accept nothing or go bankrupt fighting for what they were owed. She pulled out another document. The Friel family business closed after 3 generations. After decades of building a reputation for quality, after employing dozens of workers who depended on them for their livelihoods, gone, because Donald Trump decided not to pay a bill. And when they were destroyed, when their employees were out of work, when their family legacy was erased, do you know what you were doing? Buying another golf course. Their $83,000 would not have covered the Greens' fees for a season. Trump shifted uncomfortably in his seat. In business, you negotiate. Sometimes work is not up to standard. You did not negotiate, Crockett cut in, her voice hard. You stole. There is a difference. Negotiation is when both parties agree to terms before the work is done. Negotiation is when you discuss price and quality and timeline up front. Theft is when you let someone do the work, accept the work, use the work, and then refuse to pay for it. 3,500 times. Mr. President, that is not negotiation. That is a business model built on exploitation. That is a strategy: hire small businesses who cannot fight back, take their work, refuse to pay, and dare them to sue. She turned to the audience. Raise your hand if you own a small business or if someone in your family does. A parent, a sibling, a spouse, a child. Dozens of hands went up across the auditorium. Now imagine this. You get a contract with a famous billionaire. You are thrilled. This is the break you have been waiting for. You do the work. Good work. Work you are proud of. Work you stay late to finish, work you check twice, work you put your name on. You send the invoice, and then, nothing. Months pass. You call, you email, you leave messages with secretaries. Finally, someone calls back and tells you Mr. Trump does not think the work was worth what he agreed to pay. He is offering you 30 cents on the dollar. Take it or sue him. She let the scenario sink in, watching faces in the audience shift from attention to recognition to anger. That is not hardball. That is not tough negotiation. That is not the way business is supposed to work. That is predatory. It is using your wealth and your lawyers as weapons against people who cannot fight back. It is knowing that the system protects people with money and punishes people without it. And it is the same pattern we have seen all night. China will pay, Mexico will pay. The contractor will accept whatever I decide to give him after the work is done, because what choice does he have? Crockett picked up the children's shoes from earlier. You want to know why I keep coming back to these shoes? Because the person who made them, somewhere in Vietnam, is just like the Friels. Someone who did honest work and trusted that they would be paid fairly. And just like the Friels, they are getting less than they deserve. Not because of inflation, not because of market forces, not because of anything they did wrong, because Donald Trump decided that he would rather tax their work than pay his bills. She set the shoes down carefully, almost gently. 3,500 lawsuits, 6,000 Trump University victims, $46 billion for a wall Mexico was supposed to pay for, $1,200 per family per year in tariffs. Add it up. This is not a presidency. This is not a business career. This is a pattern, a lifelong pattern of taking from others and leaving them to deal with the consequences. And American working people are always the ones left holding the bill. The veteran in the third row was no longer just shaking his head. He was standing up slowly, supporting himself on the chair in front of him, his old knees protesting, but his determination overriding the pain. "Ma'am," he said, his voice carrying across the silent auditorium. "My son had a drywall company. Subcontracted for one of his properties in Atlantic City in the 90s. Never got paid. Filed for bankruptcy 2 years later. Lost his house. His wife left. I thought I was the only one who remembered. I thought everyone forgot." Crockett nodded at him, her eyes meeting his across the room. "You are not alone, sir. There are 3,500 families just like yours. And tonight, they are watching too." Round 4 was over. And the weight of the evidence was becoming crushing. Numbers do not lie. People lie about numbers constantly, inflating them, deflating them, hiding them, spinning them. But the numbers themselves are stubborn, indifferent things. They sit there waiting to be counted, and they do not care about politics or feelings or campaign slogans or rally crowds. They just are. Jasmine Crockett pulled out a calculator, an actual calculator, the kind accountants use with the paper tape that prints out the calculations in neat little rows. Old-fashioned, deliberate, a prop, yes, but also a tool, a reminder that underneath all the rhetoric, there are numbers, and numbers tell the truth. Let us do some math, she said. The kind they do not teach at Trump University, because it involves actually being honest about money. She began punching in numbers, the calculator clicking with each keystroke. Trump University settlement, $25 million paid to victims of fraud. E. Jean Carroll, verdict number 1, $5 million. A jury found that Donald Trump sexually abused her and then defamed her when she told the truth about it. E. Jean Carroll, verdict number 2, $83.3 million. Another jury, another finding, more defamation. Because even after the first verdict, he could not stop attacking her. The calculator printed out the tape with a mechanical whir. Combined total for Carroll verdicts, $88.3 million. That is 2 juries, by the way. 2 separate groups of 12 Americans, randomly selected, who heard the evidence and said, he did this. Not politicians, not partisan operatives, regular people doing their civic duty. She ripped off the tape and held it up. Add them together, $25 million plus $88 million, $113 million paid out for things you said you did not do. That is a lot of money for a man who claims to be innocent. Trump's jaw tightened, the muscles in his face working. Those were politically motivated. By whom? Crockett asked, her voice genuinely curious. The jurors, 12 random citizens in each case, selected through a process where your lawyers got to reject anyone they did not like. Were they all Democratic operatives? All part of the deep state. The judges, the Carroll cases were presided over by judges appointed by both Democrats and Republicans. Were they all in on it, too? At what point, Mr. President, does everyone who holds you accountable become part of a conspiracy? And at what point does it become simpler to accept that maybe, just maybe, you actually did the things you were found liable for? She set down the calculator. But here is what really bothers me. You paid $113 million and never admitted wrongdoing. Not once. Not a single time. And you know what that means. It means you learned nothing. It means you will do it again. Because in your mind, that $113 million was not a consequence. It was not justice. It was not accountability. It was a cost of doing business. The price of continuing to operate exactly the way you always have. She picked up the calculator tape and held it up to the light. Let me tell you what $113 million could buy. It could send 4,000 students to college. Full ride, 4 years, room and board, books, everything. 4,000 young people with degrees and futures and opportunities. It could fund school lunch programs for an entire state for a year, making sure no child goes hungry while trying to learn. It could build affordable housing for 500 families, giving them stability and safety and a foundation for better lives. She let the tape fall onto the table. Instead, it went to lawyers and settlements and verdicts, because you could not keep your hands to yourself and could not tell the truth about your businesses and could not stop attacking the people brave enough to call you out. $113 million. Not building anything, not helping anyone, just cleaning up the messes you made. Trump started to speak, but Crockett held up her hand. I am not finished with the math, because $113 million is just what you have paid in settlements and verdicts. Let us talk about what American families are paying because of you. She pulled out a new sheet of paper, handwritten figures in large, clear numbers. Tariffs, $1,200 per household per year. That is the Tax Foundation's estimate. And they are not a liberal organization. They have been doing tax analysis since before your father was lending you money to avoid paying yours. There are approximately 130 million households in America. Multiply those together. She wrote the calculation on the paper. 1,200 times 130 million equals $156 billion per year. That is how much your tariffs are costing American families, not China, not foreign governments, American families every year, taken from their grocery budgets and their clothing budgets and their child care budgets and their retirement savings. 156 billion. She wrote the number in large figures, 156 billion. Wall funding, 46.6 billion, not from Mexico, from American taxpayers. Tax cuts for corporations in 2017, $1.9 trillion over 10 years. That is trillion with a T. Guess who makes up the difference when corporations pay less? Not corporations, working families, through reduced services and increased deficits and, eventually, inevitably, higher taxes on people who cannot afford lobbyists. She added up the numbers, the calculator whirring again. In your first term and now in your second, you have transferred more wealth from working families to corporations and government coffers than any president in modern history. And you have done it while telling people that someone else was paying, that someone else was footing the bill, that China and Mexico and foreign countries were finally getting what they deserved. She set down the calculator and looked directly at Trump. That is not economic policy. That is a magic trick, a con, a shell game played on a national scale. And the only people who do not see it are the ones you have convinced to look at the wrong shell. She walked closer to him. You know what the difference is between you and a street hustler running a 3-card Monte game on a sidewalk in Manhattan. The street hustler goes to jail when he gets caught. You go to the White House. But the con is exactly the same. Make people believe they are going to win. Take their money while they are distracted. Move on to the next mark. And if anyone complains, tell them they are the problem. Tell them they did not understand the game. Tell them that everyone else is happy. So what is wrong with them? The audience was completely silent. Even the camera operators seemed frozen, afraid to move and break the spell. 113 million in personal settlements, 156 billion per year in tariffs, 46 billion for a wall, trillions in corporate tax cuts. At some point, Mr. President, the math becomes undeniable. You are not making deals. You are taking money, and you are very, very good at making people thank you for it. Round 5 was over, and the numbers were on the table for everyone to count. If this math makes you angry, good. Share it. Let others do the calculations for themselves. The final round did not start with evidence. It did not start with documents or receipts or calculator tapes or photographs. It started with silence. Jasmine Crockett stood at her podium, looking at Donald Trump for a long moment. Not with anger, though she had earned the right to anger. Not with contempt, though contempt would have been understandable. With something that looked almost like sadness, the kind of sadness you feel when you finally understand something you had been trying not to see. Mr. President, she said finally, her voice quiet enough that people in the back rows leaned forward to hear. I have one last question for you. And I want you to really think about it before you answer. Take your time. There is no clock. There is no buzzer. Just you and me and 50 million people waiting to hear what you have to say. Trump straightened in his seat, wary, his eyes narrowing. In 78 years of life, in 50 years of business, in 8 years of politics, can you name one time, just one time, when you paid the price for something you did wrong? She paused, letting the question land. Not when someone else paid. Not when you settled and moved on. Not when you declared bankruptcy and let creditors and employees absorb the loss. Not when you blamed someone else and escaped consequences. One time when you, personally, Donald John Trump, faced real consequences. Consequences that hurt. Consequences that cost you something you could not buy back. Consequences the way regular Americans face them every single day when they make mistakes. She waited. Trump opened his mouth, then closed it. His hand moved toward his water glass, stopped, retreated. Take your time, Crockett repeated. I will wait. We will all wait. 10 seconds passed. The audience barely breathed. 20 seconds. Someone coughed in the back and immediately tried to stifle it. 30 seconds. A minute. The silence became a presence in the room, a weight pressing down on everyone. You cannot answer, Crockett said softly. Because there is no answer. In 78 years, you have never once paid the price for anything. Not really, not in a way that mattered, not in a way that changed you or taught you or made you better. She took a step closer to him. When your businesses failed, 6 bankruptcies, you declared bankruptcy and walked away. The contractors paid, the investors paid, the employees who lost their jobs paid, the cities that gave you tax breaks paid, you bought a new yacht. When your casinos collapsed, you had already taken your management fees. Other people lost their retirement savings. You lost nothing but the chance to lose more of other people's money. Another step. When your university was exposed as fraud, you paid a settlement with money that meant nothing to you. $25 million. That sounds like a lot to the families in this room. To you, it was a rounding error, a nuisance. The cost of making a bad headline go away. The students lost years of their lives fighting for justice. You lost the equivalent of what you spend on golf in a year. Another step. She was close now. Close enough to see the sweat on his forehead, the pulse in his neck. When you were found liable for sexual abuse, you paid millions and went back to your rallies the next day. The woman you hurt will carry that trauma forever. Every time someone says her name, she has to relive what you did. For you, it was a news cycle, something to rage about on social media for a week and then forget. She was directly in front of him now. And now, as president, you have imposed the highest tariffs in 90 years. Who pays? American families. Every time they go to the grocery store. You sign executive orders that tear children from their parents. Who pays? Those children, with nightmares and therapy bills and trust issues for the rest of their lives. You promised a wall that Mexico would fund. Who pays? Taxpayers, while programs for veterans and seniors and disabled Americans get cut. She leaned in slightly. Every single time, the pattern is the same. You cause the damage. Someone else cleans it up. You take the credit. Someone else takes the blame. You move on to the next thing. Someone else is left behind picking up the pieces. She straightened and took a step back. So let me tell you who you are, Mr. President, since you will not tell us yourself, since 78 years of life have not given you the self-awareness to figure it out. She raised one finger. You are not a businessman. Businessmen create value. They build things that did not exist before. They employ people and pay them fairly and create products that improve lives. You extract value. You take from contractors, from students, from business partners, from families, and you leave wreckage behind. That is not business. That is parasitism. A second finger. You are not a deal maker. Deal makers find mutual benefit. They create agreements where both sides walk away better off than they started. You find ways to make others pay for your benefit. You promise one thing and deliver another. You shake hands and then refuse to honor the agreement. That is not dealing. That is taking. A third finger. You are not a leader. Leaders accept responsibility. When things go wrong, leaders say, I made a mistake. I will fix it. I will do better. You have never said those words in your life. When things go wrong, it is always someone else's fault. The judges, the media, the Democrats, the deep state, the rhinos, the woke mob, everyone except the men in the mirror. That is not leadership. That is cowardice dressed in a red hat. She lowered her hand. You are, quite simply, a man who has spent 78 years making other people pay for his mistakes. And tonight, 50 million Americans finally see it. Not because I told them something new, but because I reminded them of what they already knew and had been afraid to say out loud. She turned to the audience. Let me ask you all a question now. How many of you have ever paid for a mistake? Not someone else's mistake, your own. A bill you could not quite cover, so you ate rice and beans for a month. A job you lost because you messed up, and it took you 6 months to find another one. A choice that cost you, really cost you, and you had to live with the consequences. Almost every hand went up, slowly at first, then more, until the room was a forest of raised arms. That is what separates you from him. You pay your debts. You own your errors. You lie awake at night worrying about things he has never thought about for a single second, whether you can afford your kids' braces, whether your car will pass inspection, whether your job will still exist next year. You know what accountability feels like, because you live it every day. She turned back to Trump. And he stands up there and tells you that he is fighting for you, that he understands you, that he is one of you, that only he can fix your problems. She shook her head slowly. He is not one of you. He has never been one of you. Not for 1 minute of his 78 years. He does not know what it feels like to choose between groceries and medicine. He does not know what it is like to work a job where your boss can fire you for anything. He does not know what it is like to raise children while worrying about whether you can afford their school supplies. He knows nothing about your life, and he does not care to learn, because to him, you are not people. You are marks. You are revenue. You are the ones who pay while he walks away with his pockets full. She turned back to Trump one final time. Tonight, for the first time in a long time, you cannot walk away. You cannot declare bankruptcy on this conversation. You cannot sue your way to silence. You cannot tweet your way to distraction. You have to sit here and face what you are. And I think that is why you have not said a word in 10 minutes, because for the first time in your life, there is nowhere to hide. Trump sat motionless. His face was pale, the television makeup unable to hide the grayness underneath. His hands were still on the armrests, gripping so hard the tendons stood out like cables. His mouth was a thin line, pressed tight, holding back words that would not come. I am going to give you one more chance, Mr. President. One more chance to answer my question. In 78 years, when did you pay the price for your own actions? When did you personally suffer for something you did wrong? Give me one example. Just one. 5 seconds, 10, 30, a full minute. Nothing, not a word, not a sound. That is what I thought, Crockett said. She gathered her papers, her receipts, her evidence, her calculator, and tucked them back into her bag, slowly, methodically, giving the silence room to breathe. America, you have seen tonight who this man really is. Not through my words, through his silence, through his inability to name a single moment of accountability in 8 decades of life. You have seen the pattern laid out in receipts and settlements and court documents. Promise that others will pay. Take the benefits for yourself. Leave the wreckage for everyone else. China will pay. Mexico will pay. You will be rich. The same con over and over, with different packaging and different marks. She walked to the edge of the stage and looked directly into the camera, directly into the eyes of 50 million Americans. The question now is not whether Donald Trump will change. He is 78 years old. He will not change. He cannot change. This is who he is, who he has always been, who he will always be. The question is whether we will change, whether we will keep falling for the same con over and over, or whether we will finally say, enough. No more. The bill stops here. We are done paying for your mistakes. She picked up her bag and slung it over her shoulder. My name is Jasmine Crockett. I am a congresswoman from Texas. I am running for United States Senate, and I am not asking you to trust me. I am asking you to trust the receipts, the evidence, the math, the pattern you have seen with your own eyes tonight. Because unlike the men sitting behind me, numbers do not lie. Receipts do not lie. Court documents do not lie. The truth is stubborn that way. She turned and walked off the stage, her footsteps echoing in the absolute silence. Behind her, Donald Trump sat alone under the lights, surrounded by empty space and 50 million watching eyes, with nothing to say. For the first time anyone could remember, the men who always had words, always had attacks, always had someone to blame, had nothing, just silence and the receipts piled on the table. The applause that finally broke the stillness was not the roaring approval of a political rally. It was something deeper, something more personal, something almost sacred. The sound of people who finally felt seen, who finally felt that someone understood what they had been going through, who finally had someone to blame other than themselves for the prices they were paying. Mrs. Rodriguez was crying quietly in the third row. The veteran had sat back down, but he was nodding over and over, as if saying yes to something he had waited a long time to hear. Across the auditorium, people were turning to each other, strangers sharing a moment, a recognition, a release. 50 million people watched. And in living rooms across America, something shifted. Something that could not be put back. What happened next unfolded in stages, like a slow-motion avalanche gaining mass and momentum as it descended. The clip titled, "Who Always Pays," reached 52 million views within 24 hours. It was not the largest political video in American history, but it was close. And unlike most viral moments, the gaffes, the gotchas, the awkward stumbles, this was not a mistake someone made. It was 6 minutes of a woman asking a simple question and a man unable to answer. The hashtag Trump never pays trended globally for 3 consecutive days. Not promoted by bots or political operatives or coordinated campaigns, but shared organically by ordinary people who saw their own stories in Crockett's words. The contractor who never got paid. The student who lost their savings. The family struggling to afford groceries. The veteran whose son lost everything. Memes proliferated across every platform. Trump's face photoshopped onto images of people dodging restaurant bills, hiding from landlords, running from collection agencies. The most shared showed him as a cartoon figure sprinting away from a giant receipt labeled 78 years of unpaid tabs. Another showed him at a restaurant saying, "Mexico will pay," while the waiter looked confused. Saturday Night Live opened their next episode with a cold open featuring Trump in a therapy session, desperately trying to name one time he paid for something. The therapist, played by a perfectly cast comedian, kept asking, "But how did that make you feel?" And Trump kept answering, "Somebody else feels the feelings. I just win. I always win. Except when I lose, which is never, except when it is, but that's someone else's fault." The business community began to distance themselves. Not publicly at first, few wanted to be the first to break ranks, but in the quiet ways that mattered. Phone calls not returned, meetings postponed indefinitely, invitations to golf outings withdrawn. The casual association with Trump that had been a status symbol in certain circles became a liability. 3 Republican senators, all from swing states facing tough re-election campaigns, held a joint press conference demanding a comprehensive review of tariff policy. They did not mention the town hall directly, but they did not need to. "Our constituents are struggling with rising costs," Senator Marcus from Pennsylvania said, standing between his colleagues from Wisconsin and Nevada. "We need to take another look at trade policy and ensure it is working for American families, not against them." Walmart and Target, companies that had quietly absorbed tariff costs for months to keep prices competitive, issued public statements within hours of each other. "Recent trade policies have significantly impacted our pricing," Walmart's CEO said in a carefully worded release. "We are committed to affordability, but we cannot continue to absorb these costs indefinitely. We urge policymakers to consider the impact on working families." Target's statement was nearly identical, as if both companies had finally received permission to say what they had been thinking for months. Internal polling leaked to the press showed Trump's approval rating dropping 15 points in 2 weeks, the sharpest decline since the early days of the pandemic. The crosstabs were worse. Among women over 50, he was down 23 points. Among suburban voters who had narrowly supported him in 2024, he was now underwater by 12. Among independents, the collapse was even more dramatic. The Supreme Court ruling came on a Thursday morning in late winter, announced without fanfare in a brief order that would reshape American trade policy. In a narrow 5-4 decision, the court found that Trump's emergency tariffs exceeded presidential authority under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. The statute, the majority wrote, never mentioned tariffs and was never intended to allow a president to unilaterally impose taxes on virtually all imports. "The power to tax is the power of Congress," Justice Williams wrote for the majority. "A president may not, under the guise of emergency, exercise a legislative function that the Constitution reserves to the people's representatives." The administration announced a 30% rollback of tariffs within hours, framed as a strategic recalibration rather than a defeat. It satisfied no one. Critics said it was too little, too late. Supporters said it was a betrayal of campaign promises. The rollback itself became evidence of what Crockett had argued: the tariffs were never necessary, never effective, and always designed more for political theater than economic policy. The phrase "Trump tax" entered the national vocabulary, not as a partisan attack, but as a descriptor. News anchors used it casually. Editorial boards debated its accuracy. A children's television host accidentally said it during a segment about economics and had to be edited out in post-production. The "Trump tax on groceries" became shorthand for the gap between what things should cost and what they actually cost. In Texas, something unprecedented happened. A poll showed a generic Democrat leading a generic Republican in the Senate race for the first time since 1994. Crockett's fundraising numbers shattered records: $12 million in 30 days, mostly from small-dollar donations averaging $47, the same number of times Trump had lied about who pays tariffs. It was unclear whether donors had chosen that number deliberately, but it did not matter. The symbolism was perfect. By the time 6 months had passed, the transformation was complete. The word "Trumped" had acquired a new meaning in popular usage: to be deceived by someone who promised others would pay. "I got trumped by my contractor," people said around water coolers. "The warranty was a total Trump job," people wrote in product reviews. Language has a way of crystallizing truth into slang, and the truth about Trump had found its vernacular expression. Dictionaries began adding the new definition. A documentary titled "The Bill Always Comes" premiered on multiple streaming platforms simultaneously, featuring interviews with Trump University victims, unpaid contractors, economists explaining exactly how tariffs worked and who paid them, and families struggling to afford groceries. It was watched by 40 million households in its first month and won early buzz for awards season. Congressional hearings examined tariff policy with new intensity. Expert after expert testified that American consumers and businesses bore the cost, regardless of what the administration claimed. Charts and graphs filled television screens, but none of them were as powerful as Crockett's original presentation: a shopping cart, a receipt, and a question. Political analysts began referring to the Phoenix effect, named after the site of the town hall, to describe the moment when a political figure's vulnerabilities, long known but rarely confronted, become impossible to ignore. Trump's weaknesses were always there, one analyst wrote in a piece that went viral itself. The pattern was visible to anyone who looked. Crockett just made people see it. She gave them permission to see it. And once you see something like that, you cannot unsee it. The midterm elections approached with a new dynamic reshaping races across the country. Candidates in both parties calibrated their positions on trade, on tariffs, on economic populism. The conversation had shifted. Where once "tough on China" was an unquestionable good, now candidates had to explain what it meant for prices, for families, for the people who actually paid the bills. Republican candidates in swing districts quietly removed tariff boasts from their campaign materials. Trump himself changed, not in substance, that ship had sailed decades ago, but in energy. His rallies, once 3-hour marathons of grievance and entertainment and off-script improvisation, became shorter, more defensive, more scripted. He still attacked. He still deflected. He still blamed. But something was missing. The bravado had an edge of desperation. The confidence seemed performed rather than felt. His crowds noticed. They still cheered, but with less enthusiasm, less certainty. He never answered Crockett's question. In 6 months of interviews, speeches, social media posts, and campaign events, he never named a single instance of paying the price for his own mistakes. Interviewers asked. He deflected. The silence became its own answer, repeated every time someone brought it up, becoming more damning with each repetition. And somewhere in Phoenix, in a modest house in a working-class neighborhood where the grass was brown from water restrictions and the mailbox was slightly dented, Mrs. Rodriguez taped the grocery receipt to her refrigerator with a magnet shaped like a saguaro cactus. The receipt from the day before the town hall, showing prices that were 30% higher than they had been 2 years earlier, with items circled in red pen. A reminder, a testament, a record of what she had paid because someone promised that others would. Her grandchildren asked about it sometimes. "Why is that receipt on the fridge, abuela?" And she would tell them, in her measured way, about the night someone finally said out loud what everyone had been feeling. The night the men who never paid for anything had to sit in silence while a woman from Texas read him his bill. They did not fully understand. Not yet. But someday they would. Someday they would be old enough to know what it meant when powerful people made promises they never intended to keep. And they would remember the receipt on the refrigerator, yellowed with age, but never thrown away. Some things are worth keeping. The Texas Senate race is still months away. That story has not been written yet. But something had already been won in that town hall in Phoenix, something that could not be measured in votes or polls or fundraising numbers. For the first time in decades, someone had held a president accountable in real time, with evidence that ordinary people could understand. Not in a courtroom where lawyers speak in jargon and procedure obscures meaning. Not in a congressional hearing where 5-minute time limits and parliamentary rules prevent any real exchange. But in a simple conversation with simple props, asking simple questions that anyone could understand. Who pays? It turned out the answer had been there all along, hidden in plain sight on every receipt, every tax form, every electric bill, every grocery run. The American people pay. They always have. They always will, until they decide not to. And they finally had someone willing to say it out loud. The town hall lasted 2 hours. The clips are still circulating months later. The phrase, 47 times, became shorthand for political lying. The shopping cart became iconic, reproduced on protest signs and political cartoons and Halloween costumes. Someone started selling replicas of the receipt with "Who pays" printed at the bottom, donating proceeds to food banks. But the most lasting image was not the card or the receipt or the calculator tape or the photograph of the rusting wall. It was the silence at the end. The 10 minutes of silence. The longest 10 minutes of Donald Trump's public life. The moment when a man who had never been held accountable, who had never faced a question he could not deflect, who had never sat with the weight of his own choices, was finally forced to face the question he could not answer. When did you ever pay the price? 78 years, 50 years of business, 8 years of politics, 3,500 lawsuits, 6,000 defrauded students, 25 million in settlement, 88 million in verdicts, 156 billion in tariffs, 46 billion for a wall, and not one single example. That silence said more than any speech could, more than any attack ad or investigation or editorial or documentary. It said what everyone had always suspected but rarely heard confirmed. This man has spent his entire life making others pay for his choices. Now, finally, the bill was coming due. And for the first time in 78 years, Donald Trump had no one to pass it to. If this story resonated with you, if you have felt the pinch of rising prices and wondered who was responsible, if you have been cheated and told it was your fault, if you have paid for someone else's mistakes while they walked away, share it with someone who needs to hear it. The receipts are real. The numbers are documented. The pattern is clear.